Hi, I'm Jenny Kanoki, and this is my Module 12 case study. Section 1. Mr. Santos is the principal at Briardale Elementary. The school relies on its foundation to have fundraisers to raise funds for their supplementary programs. Mr. Bailey is selected this year to be the foundation leader at Briardale. Mr. Morley is the foundation leader at another elementary school in the district, and how they tie together is Mr. Bailey and Mr. Morley went to college together and they competed against each other for office positions at their college. Mr. Bailey plans and communicates a fundraiser for Briardale that is projected to be really successful. And on the night of the event, somebody tips off the sheriff in town about the event. He shows up and books Mr. Bailey. Mr. Bailey is charged with a misdemeanor in his role for the raffle for cash event. Section 2. Has anyone been harmed by the action or decision of another? The reputation of Mr. Bailey, Mr. Santos, and others associated with Briardale, they've been harmed. I'm assuming they're probably hurting with what the community is saying about their event. The supplementary curriculum and therefore ultimately the students and staff will be harmed if they do not receive any funds. Does the action or situation contravene an existing law? Mr. Bailey unknowingly, supposedly, it doesn't say that he or Mr. Santos knew that there was a law being broken that technically having a raffle for cash event falls under the category of gambling. The school district could also be held liable because there was obviously a large sum of money that was being raised in the raffle for cash event. Section 3. Synthesize what happened. The parent leader for Briardale Elementary's fundraiser is arrested for breaking the law unbeknownst to himself or the principal at the beginning of what is projected to be a very successful and competitive fundraiser in the school district. Section 4. The people involved, Mr. Santos, the principal, Mr. Bailey and Mr. Morley as foundation leaders of their schools, the tipster who tipped off the sheriff about the event, the sheriff, Briardale staff, students, and families, and then fellow community members and stakeholders. The place. Briardale Elementary is in the middle of a very diverse community. It is very populated, and it is a very popular school since it is in the middle of the community. Several other school events and also community events are held at Briardale. The school districts in the area compete with these fundraisers to see who can raise the most funds. The program, it is an elementary school and it relies on fundraisers for its supplementary programs. Some unknown facts that we do not know that I would love to have more information on. Is it a public school system? We can assume that it probably is with the multiple elementary schools that funnel into a middle school and then a high school, that it is probably a public school system, but it does not say for sure. Does the school district, county, state have any laws on raffle for cash events? Clearly something legal happened, that it fell under the category of gambling, but there was nothing stated specifically. Did Mr. Bailey know if he was breaking the law, or Mr. Santos? Was it just an honest mistake? What is the relationship now between Mr. Bailey and Mr. Morley? I found it really ironic that they went to college together and they competed for office spots, and now they are both foundation leaders. I would love to know what their professional school foundation relationship is. Section 5. Could the conflict, the situation, or the decision be damaging to stakeholders? Absolutely. Where is all this money going to go? What is the program going to do for its funds? How is this going to affect the students and staff at Briardale, as well as Mr. Santos with his job and just Mr. Bailey's reputation? What individuals and groups have an important stake in the outcome? The students and staff at Briardale, Mr. Bailey personally, Mr. Santos professionally, and the reputation of Briardale Elementary as a whole. Have all the relevant stakeholders been consulted? No, in my opinion. I would like to know what the superintendent knows about this situation or what they have to say. Does the superintendent attend these fundraisers for the public? Does the school have an attorney, and has that person been consulted? Can I learn more about this situation? Absolutely. I would love to learn more about the other contributing factors in this situation. Do I know enough to make a decision? I am going to make a decision about what plan I think would be best to implement, but I would love to know more about this situation and some of the other facts in it. Section 6. So option 1 for one of the plans that we could consider is don't take any action at all. Let it play out on its own, let people talk about it, and just let it, kind of fiddle out. Let the superintendent, the law, and the other stakeholders handle it. Option 2, Mr. Santos can make a public statement on behalf of Briardale. They could take away fundraising so that something like this doesn't happen again. And Briardale and the other possible schools, they could just look at revamping their budget to see if they could somehow fit funding in for the supplementary programs, or they could just see how those programs do without the funding. Option number 3. Mr. Santos makes a public statement on behalf of Briardale. He could possibly, if he has the superintendent's approval, get some remarks from Mr. Barely and let him also say something to the community. Mr. Santos could gather information from training and the attorneys, and so that he is more knowledgeable about fundraisers and the handling of money and what you legally have to do. Mr. Santos will implement policies then to the foundation for future things instead of just always going along with what they say. He can have some guidelines and policies that they need to be following. If the superintendent is highly involved, all the building principals in the district could work together to make sure that all of their foundations are legally aligned in their fundraisers. And you could meet with the foundations on a regular basis to keep them informed about laws and policies. So evaluating the options, option number 1, I don't think there are any pros to the situation. I don't think sitting back and doing nothing is the right answer when something like this happens. Cons, there's multiple more than this of just letting it play out and letting community members and other people decide how they feel and discussing what happens to these funds without there ever being any clarification. Option number 2, Mr. Santos does address the public with an explanation. And in a roundabout way, if there wasn't a foundation, then there wouldn't be situations like this, because this is really embarrassing and hurtful. Even if it truly was an honest mistake, it still just really stinks that it happened. And so if there was never the chance for it to happen again, you could kind of just collect your losses and move on. But ultimately, every year after this, there would be a huge loss if the supplementary programs didn't receive any funding for their curriculum needs. Option number 3, the pros that I believe is that Mr. Santos addresses the public. He's given the opportunity to give an honest clarification on what happened and could possibly include Mr. Barely, as I said. The district then has the opportunity to sit down and create policies that still allow fundraisers, but will hopefully stop something from this happening ever again. Cons to this, there could be a pushback from the foundation that they do not want to have policies or help from the administration. They want to be able to just kind of do what they want as they have done in the past. And the schools might oppose working together. The best option that I believe is option number 3. This provides Mr. Santos and Mr. Barely, possibly the superintendent and some other stakeholders, with the opportunity to come forward, address the community, and just shed some honest light on this situation that could help mend some broken relationships or some hurt feelings, and just kind of squash, the talk that happens when these situations happen. The foundation will get to continue to host fundraisers at their schools, but now they will be legally informed. Ultimately, the students and staff will benefit the most if there continues to be fundraisers, because the foundations will be raising money for them, and so that will promote the development of student success. Mr. Santos can learn from the superintendent, the attorney, and the trainings, and also from the law, how to handle situations like this and what they need to do in fundraisers. And so if he keeps his job and remains being the principal, ultimately it can just further his knowledge on his job. Section 9, implementing my decision. So for option number 3 is the one that I picked. Issuing a public apology. I just think in these situations it's best to be real and be honest with what happened. Was it an honest mistake? Did Mr. Santos not do his job? Should he, well, obviously he didn't, in my opinion. He should have known what was going on with having a public event like this. He should have known that it was a breach of the law. And so he needs to be more informed with the foundation. And so option number 3 gives him the opportunity to learn and also get more involved with the foundation. And then it also just allows him, and I would also think in the best situation that Mr. Barely could also address the public if it was an honest mistake and he didn't know, because it said that he did a fundraiser like this back in college. And so he may just have not known that it was okay and it was legal. Either back when he was in college it was still legal, or because it was a private college event for a fraternity, that's not the same guidelines as when you're hosting it for a public school. And so if it really was an honest mistake that he had no idea that it was against the law, then I think he should be given the opportunity to also have a platform to explain himself to the community if he's going to continue to live there. And so I think the first thing they need to do is issue an apology and hopefully just a sincere explanation that it was just an honest mistake. The Mr. Santos and the superintendent, they need to discuss with the attorney and also the law about what they're going to do with these funds. Do they need to be returned to the people? Is it turned over to the state? I'm not quite sure what happens in this situation. And so they need to discuss with the money that was already collected, what are they going to do in these situations. Mr. Santos meets with the superintendent, the attorney, and other principals to create policies and guidelines for the foundation and future fundraisers to make sure that they are legally aligned. I think it would be really great to come up with a notebook that you could give to each new foundation leader about, these are some of the fundraisers we've done. Here's the guidelines that we follow. Here's what you legally have to follow, and just give them just somewhere to go, some guidelines on how to stay legally aligned. The principals, and I think it would be great too if the foundation leaders could also attend some trainings on legal points about what is legally allowed at public school events and what can they do to raise money so that they can avoid a situation like this ever happening again. Each principal then needs to go back and introduce those policies to their respective foundations. The principals continue to work closely with their foundations and monitoring their plans and events for legal alignment. So obviously Mr. Santos, and I would probably venture to say the other principals in the district, they need to be told that they need to work closely with their foundation leaders. If they are going to be representing the school out in public hosting fundraisers, then they need to make sure that they know not only what the fundraiser plans are, but they need to make sure that they are legally aligned so that you avoid giving yourselves and kind of the school a black eye. And so ultimately, I think option number 3, just being honest and, saying that you made a mistake, but figuring out how can you learn from this mistake and how can we move forward to still have fundraisers, still, raise money to support our supplementary programs, but learn from this so that this never happens again and that we can continue to ultimately do what we need to do to support our students and staff so that we can have the most success academically, professionally, just success all around for students and staff members in this school district. Thank you for listening.